I'm Stephen Bowie. This is April 29th, 2010. I'm conducting an interview with Jeffrey Hayden for the Archive of American Television. We're in Los Angeles, California. Okay, Jeff. First of all, can you just tell us when you were born?
I was born in October of 1926.
What's the full date?
October 15, 1926.
And where?
New York City, the Bronx, New York.
Did you grow up there?
Grew up? Yes, I did.
What did you like to do when you were growing up? Did you have hobbies?
Yes, I guess you would say I did. I read a lot, played football a lot, studied a lot.
And what did you think you were going to be when you were growing up?
Had no idea whatsoever. Went to college and thought for a while I would be in the pre-med program. Took a couple of chemistry courses and immediately realized, no, I was not going to stay in pre-med. Accidentally one day went to the theater with a friend who was trying out for a play. And of course, as the story goes, he didn't get the part, and I read, and I got the part. Complete surprise. But that led me to the theater in North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the University of North Carolina. And I stayed in the theater for the next couple of years.
And tell me a little bit about that theater program at UNC and what you were doing in it.
It was a wonderful program. There was a professor by the name of Howard Koch is from LA. Prof. Koch was a wonderful man who ran that department, had a program called the Carolina Folk Plays, and we wrote plays having to do with our very personal lives, and we then produced them, directed them, acted in them, and it was a wonderful experience for me. Wonderful.
Did you learn things doing the theater there that you carried on into your
To this very day. To this very day. We had to read plays every week, one or two plays, and had to on a 3x5 index card on one side, had to detail the story of the play, but on the other side we had to deal with the theme of the play. And so for 2 solid years, every week, I must have read 2 or 3 great plays, English, Russian, French, Spanish, all the great literature in the theater. And it, in a sense, spoiled me for television, where we had to just, get the script and shoot it, go take the pages and shoot them. But I had this incredible background of having read all of the famous plays, classic plays, and it served me in very good stead. As a matter of fact, I would go into a television series, I'd meet the producer, give me a script, I'd come back the next day, we'd talk about the script, and finally they started calling me the rabbi, because I would always have ideas about, well, what does this script mean? Where are we going with this? What is it really trying to say? And that all came from that background in Chapel Hill at the university.
So it sounds like if they called you the rabbi, that was a little unusual, that the producers might not have been expecting that kind of analysis.
Well, generally in television, a director comes in, gets a script, and he goes and shoots it. Somehow, because of my background, when I read a script, I'd always have some thoughts, ideas, and I really wanted to know, why were we doing this show? What was the theme? What was the meaning? What were we trying to say in the story? Not necessarily a message, but just so I understood how to deal with the material. And that really came from my background at the university.
So you got into theater at UNC. When did you decide you wanted to be a director specifically?
Right there and then. I told you this experience where I went with my friend. He didn't get the part. They pointed to me and said, well, you're next. I went up and I read. I got the part. I was in that play and realized right then and there I was not going to be an actor. I had no interest in acting, but I was very interested in the theater and the literature of the theater. And so I decided, well, I'll try to direct. And that's what I did.
So after college, what did you do?
Left the university, went to New York, looked for a job. Very lucky, I found a job at NBC in the radio division. There was no television in 1946. And so I had this job in the research department, sitting at not a computer in those days, it was a calculator. And for 2 years, I sat and punched numbers into a calculator, or for a year. And then they had a testing division. They tested radio shows with audiences. And I moved into program testing, and that kind of got me around the network or the offices in New York. And I met some writers and developed what I thought and still am told was the first sitcom ever done on television at ABC Television.
Well, let me back up a little bit. When did you first see television or become aware of it?
1947, I think, 6 or 7. I lived in Greenwich Village. I had a good buddy who was in the Army Signal Corps, and when he got out, he built himself a very small 4x5 green television screen, which was the first I'd ever seen. And we used to go up to his apartment in the village and look at pictures on this television screen in about, I guess it was 1947.
Huh. Do you remember anything you saw? What were those?
Not really. Just there were images of people from NBC, as it happens, and just people talking on this tiny green screen.
So tell me about the sitcom that you created, the first
Well, as I was working at NBC, I had a writer friend, and I had listened to the Henry Aldrich show on the radio, the sitcom on the radio, and I thought to myself, well, there's this thing called television coming along. Why couldn't we do the equivalent of a radio sitcom for television? So I created, with a writer, a show called The Billy Bean Show. I had met Arnold Stang, a wonderful character actor, and said, Arnold, how would you like to be in this television show, which I'm trying to develop and trying to sell to one of these networks? He liked the idea. We had a nice script. We had a nice actor. I went to ABC Television, which was just then getting on the air, and talked to some of the programming people. They liked my script, and they said, well, let's go. We'll do 6 half-hour shows, comedy shows with Arnold in the world's smallest department store. That was the basic premise of the show. But they wouldn't let me direct because I had not had enough experience, although I had directed some radio shows at WNYC in New York. And so I hired Marty Ritt, who was a friend from the Actors Studio, and Marty directed 6 television episodes. I think the first sitcom ever done with Arnold Stang. At the end of the 6 shows, ABC said, well, there just aren't enough people with enough television sets for us to support this lovely little show. But I left NBC to produce those 6 half hours and said to them, well, fellas, I left my job. I need a job. What have you got? And they said, here, go downstairs to the basement of 7 West 66th Street, which was then a riding stable off Central Park. And they said, clean out the stalls from those horses and whitewash the walls, and we'll be a couple of other guys with you. And when you finish that, we'll bring in some moviolas. Well, I'd never even heard of a movie. I didn't know what it was, but we did. There were about 4 of us who started in that basement at 7 West 66th Street. We cleaned out those stalls, not a very savory job, whitewashed the walls, and in came these sort of, at the time for us, monstrous machines, 1 in each stall, and they then brought in cans of film, and they said, cut these films down to 90 minutes or 120 minutes and leave room for commercials. And they brought somebody in to teach us how to use the moviola. And there were about 4 of us down there. We did it for several months. And then as they added more programs to their lineup in the beginning, we moved upstairs, and my first show was the roller derby. I went out as an associate director to New Jersey, and we would shoot the roller derby.
Let me interject and ask you to fill in a couple of details on that if I can. The sitcom you created, what was the name of it?
The Billy Bean Show.
And did you do anything in particular to take that sort of radio idea and
Totally.
adapt it for television?
Oh, totally. It was just a total, complete, well, not a ripoff, but I had listened to the Aldrich Family show and knew sort of the format of introducing the characters, presenting them with a problem, and resolving it in a humorous fashion. So in a sense, that was the model for this show. Well, we didn't take anything directly from that, but it was the model that we built our show upon, and it worked. Arnold was very good, very funny.
I was just wondering if there's anything you did to sort of take that radio idea and make it more visual for television.
Well, yes, we did. You know, put him in this world's smallest department store, got him a girlfriend, got him a family, gave him problems in that store. We didn't ever go outside that small department store though on the show. We had a small studio at 7 West 66, the first small television studio that ABC had.
And who was the writer you worked with on that?
George Lefferts, later to become a major television writer, very fine writer.
And there were some other notable people who were down there mucking out the stables with you.
Yes,
who
there
were
were
those?
indeed. Teddy Nathanson became a big vice president in sports later. I'm sorry, I can't offhand remember, but all of those fellows with me went on to wonderful careers in television.
Dwight Himian was one of them,
Exactly, that's the name I couldn't remember. Good for you, good for you. Dwight was down there with us, yes. Charlie Dubin, as I recall. No, Charlie came in later. Anyway, all of the 3 or 4 of us went on to careers in television.
So you were cutting films on the Moviola, and then you became an associate director. What is that?
Well, I went out with a director who was Sonny Diskin, I remember. I held the watch on, the time element involved. I set up the shots. We had 3 or 4 cameras off the remote truck, and I would preview all the shots and set them up, and then Sonny would call the shots, to put on the air.
And what were some of the shows you worked on as an associate director?
Oh, several. I did a wonderful show I think it was called Holiday Inn. Don Amici was the MC. Paul Whiteman conducted the orchestra. Don Sadler was the choreographer. Big variety show at ABC. Then I had some shows, daytime shows. Gloria Swanson did an interview show, and I directed her for several months in a small studio downstairs.
Really? So you were directing?
Yes. Then I became, after I had been an associate director for at least a year, I think, on various shows, like the Holiday Inn show I mentioned, I then got to do my own shows as a director.
What do you remember about Gloria Swanson?
Very charming, lovely lady, bright lady, sweet lady. We had a wonderful time.
And I think you worked on Stop the Music. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do indeed. I was doing the commercial segments of Stop the Music in the basement of the Ritz Theater in New York. And I did that for quite a while, and I met the writers of that show, Harrison and Gould, who then went on to do a daytime variety show with Bert Parks from Stop the Music. And after they got on the air, I knew them from the Stop the Music show. When they got on the air with their daytime variety show with Bert Parks, they invited me to come direct that show. And that's when I started directing network television in a big way, because that was a major show for General Foods, as I recall. And we had 3 30-minute variety shows every week for a whole season.
Just to go back to Stop to the Music for a minute, can you just describe that show? What it was, what the format of it was?
Vaguely. It's been a long time back. Harry Salter was the leader of the orchestra. They would play these wonderful songs, and it was a major quiz show, of Stop the Music, and then contestants were asked questions about the music and so forth, and were awarded with prizes. But it was essentially a variety show.
Before we start talking about the shows that you directed, I wanted to ask you briefly, you mentioned the Actors Studio.
Yes.
Can you tell me what that was and why it was important, first of all?
Well, in about 1948, I heard about this group of actors in New York who were going to class once or twice a week, and Strasberg was not teaching so much as leading this group, where actors would do 1 or 2 scenes every Friday at 11 o'clock, and Strasberg would do a critique of the scenes, and the actors who were in attendance would also participate in terms of discussing the work of the actors, and then Strasberg would do a summation, so to say. And I was intrigued with that, interested as I was in the theater. And so I just started going to the Actors Studio and eventually was accepted as a director, first not as a member, but as an observer, and then finally years later as a member. And that was beyond those college years that I talked about with Prof. Koch. Those years with Strasberg were critical in terms of my development, I think, as an actor.
What did you learn?
I'm sorry. Critical to me as a director working with actors.
Right. So what exactly? So what did you tell me? What you learned from Strasberg?
We'd be here all day. I really don't know how to put that in a couple of sentences, other than to say that I learned, which I really did not know from my college experience and my NBC experience, how actors had to use their instruments, their personal being, so to say, in terms of creating a character. That was all new to me. And I actually went to the American Theater Wing. When I got to New York, after I'd been there for a while, I'd heard about the American Theater Wing, which is a wonderful school in New York for actors, directors, and so forth. And I went and signed up for a course, not knowing who was teaching what. I just signed up for a course in directing. Happened to be taught by Lee Strasberg. That was my introduction to Lee Strasberg. And as a result of that experience at the American Theater Wing, when I heard about the Actors Studio and that he was mentoring and dealing with the actors, I made it a point to get up there and see what was going on. And then I continued for the next 10 years, attending all those classes, those sessions.
Did you get to know Strasberg well?
I would say so, yes. Over the years, yes, I did.
What was he like? Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, that's not easy. He had at times a rather, how shall I say, quiet personality. He was not very outgoing, except when he was dealing with actors and their problems. Then he was brilliant to a fault. I mean, there was no one, for me, like him. But outside of the studio, and we did spend time with the Strasbergs. Over the years, I got to know everybody in the family quite well. He was just a very quiet man, just a very shy, retiring, quiet fellow. Nice enough, but not very loquacious, not very outgoing. But in class, in the sessions, he was just remarkable. Each and every session over the years was an experience, a great experience.
I mean, did you overlap with some of the famous people who came out of the actors? Marlon Brando, for instance?
Yes, Marlon and Paul Newman and Ben Gazzara and Jerry Page and the list, Julie Harris, Pat Neal. The list goes on and on and on. It's wonderful years, wonderful, exciting work was done at the studio by these people. And I could, over the years, see them grow and develop.
Mm-hmm. Just to take one name, do you have a memory of Marlon Brando from the studio?
Not particularly. He was there, not that often. Well, I guess my biggest memory was my own dear wife who was there. And she would do scenes from time to time, and they were just extraordinary. Pat Neal was extraordinary. Jerry Page was extraordinary. In terms of...
Geraldine Page.
Yeah. In terms of what Strasberg was able to deal with and bring these people along. It was just wonderful. Jimmy Dean was another buddy at the time.
And is that where you met your wife?
No, I met her at NBC, as a matter of fact. And finally had another friend, and he was trying to audition for the Actors Studio to get in, and I asked her would she help him get in, and of course she got in. He did eventually, but she did more quickly than he did.
Was that R.G. Armstrong?
How do you get these things? My goodness, how would you ever know that?
You told me about it earlier, actually. He was
Yeah, that's right, yes.
later a noteworthy character actor.
Yes,
But what is your wife's name?
Eva Marie Saint.
And we know her because, what did she do?
Well, she's done some pretty nice movies on the waterfront, North by Northwest, Exodus. Let's not spend the day with her credits.
No,
I could, but
Of course. No, this is your story. We just wanted to identify her for
sure.
the record. All right, so now you're directing in television. Tell me about transitioning from an associate director to a director. Was that a natural process or big leap?
It was no, it was a natural process. I had by that time a couple of years as an associate director in the booth, setting up the shots, timing the show, working with the director on all levels, you know. And so when I had been doing Stop the Music and the writers from that show moved into this daytime variety show, it really was a very smooth transition for me. It was not difficult at all. I just moved over one chair and had an associate setting up my shots and calling them and so forth, and of course directing the people in the show, which was exciting for me. But I never stopped working from the time I left college to New York. I would, do radio shows and direct radio shows from time to time, and worked in the Equity Library Theater, used to go to all the shows. So I was prepared.
Were there directors you'd worked for as an AD that you learned a lot from?
Well, yes, I would say yes. For instance, I did some shows with Alex Siegel, who was a wonderful director, and I watched Alex work at ABC, and he was someone that I admired and watched carefully, and I think learned from. Yes.
Tell me about the Burt Parks show. What was the format of it? What was it like?
It was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Burt, as a personality, was a sweet man, talented man, song and dance man. We had Robert Sherwood conducted the orchestra, very funny, nice man. There was an actor from vaudeville by the name of Murray Schlamm, very talented, very funny guy. There was a singing group called the Heather Tones, 3 or 4 young ladies, very talented. And we would meet in the morning and work on the show that the guys had written. And they would, just in front of my eyes, create wonderful, wonderful skits and sketches out of this material that the writers had brought in. And then we'd go shoot it and put it on the air 3 days a week. It was nonstop, but a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, and it was a very exciting time.
So how would that work? Would you have one day to prepare and then you'd be on the air the next? Or?
No, mainly it was a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, get together Monday morning, rehearse, put the show on the air. That was it. Tuesday, maybe meet with the writers, get an idea of what we were going to have to do. Wednesday morning, everybody would meet in the studio, rehearse the show as written, add to it, develop it, and it was very creative and really exciting, really exciting.
And from that, where did you move to?
I did it, I guess, for a solid year, maybe even more, and then there was a show coming up called The Big Payoff with Bess Morrison, a quiz variety show, and so I had an offer to move over and do that show. For 3 days a week. It was a 30-minute show, and it had also sketches inside of the quiz format of the show. And so I moved over to that show. And again, very exciting. I wrote most of that show, however. I was not only the director, but I wrote the sketches for those young ladies who were fashion models. And there was a lot of music in that show. And I would choose the music and choose the material for these young women. It was, again, very exciting. 3 days a week, a lot of work.
What were the sketches like?
Oh, hard to say. It would be based on the song. There were several songs in the course of the show, and based on the lyrics of the song, I would develop things for these, these young ladies who were the singers in the group, to act out various parts of this song with some of the fashion dresses or handbags or whatever. It was a very difficult, creative situation, night after night after night, to create 3 30-minute shows a week. But again, it was very exciting, and the shows were good shows.
Only a young man could do that.
That's for sure. But that, in turn, led me finally to dramas, which I was most interested in doing.
Well, I want to ask you one last thing about the big payoff. Did you
Sure.
direct the quiz portions of the show?
Yeah, I did the whole show, but I didn't, there was a whole group who did the actual questions and answers. That was part of the operation. And they picked the contestants. I didn't do that. And they wrote they had the questions and they dealt with that. But I did all the entertainment part of the show.
Now, this was a little bit before the quiz show scandals of the 50s,
Yes.
but I wonder, do you think that was rigged, the big payoff?
I never had any inkling of that, no, because I would see the people come in that they would interview, that was there in front of me, and I always felt it was very legitimate. And it was nothing like those big $64,000 things. These were payoffs in terms of perfume, perhaps, or there was no big money involved.
So the big payoff wasn't really that big.
Well, I don't remember exactly at this point what the big payoff was, but I know it was nowhere anything like those other quiz shows. But interestingly enough, when the Milton Berle show, which was a huge, tremendous success on NBC, when that show went off for the summer, on the summer hiatus, NBC, in their infinite wisdom, chose the big payoff to replace Milton Berle on that Sunday night spot. That was a big move for that show and for me. So I directed the big payoff, but on Sunday night with my credit, on that screen, and that led me to other shows.
You mean, why did that credit, you think, lead you to?
There it was, people who watched Milton Berle, and that was a good part of the television audience, just sort of would stay with this big payoff on Sunday night, and a lot of people in the business saw my credit. And it was a well-produced show.
What was the show that ran after that?
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, tell me.
Hold on just a minute. Forgive me. Let me go back if I can, Steve. I think the show that ran after that was the Philco Goodyear Playhouse. Came on right after. And it took a little while, but eventually I got to direct that show, maybe a couple of years later.
Okay. So, how long were you on the big payoff, roughly?
At least a year, if not more. I don't remember. I think at least for one season.
And after that, you said you began to do some television dramas. How did that come about?
Through an agent, who finally could get me some other shows.
What was the first one?
I think it was a show called The Mask. I'm not too clear about that now. And then I just kept doing dramas, 30-minute dramas, and finally got to do an omnibus, which was a wonderful show on CBS. It was late Sunday afternoon, as I recall. I did a wonderful drama written by a very good journalist whose name escapes me. Anyway, and that got quite a bit of attention. It was Richard Kiley, and my wife was on that show. And that particular series was very highly thought of in the business. And that helped me. That, I'm sure, led me to things like the Philco Goodyear Playhouse, which I did for one season. And that led me in turn to Hollywood.
Do you have any memories of directing your wife in that show?
Yeah, it was, yes, I do. Very, very pleasant, talented, creative people. Kiley was a wonderful actor, Richard Kiley, and the script was very good as I recall. And it was. Listen, all of those shows in that period were very exciting shows. Everybody was in the throes of this new, wonderful medium, where for the dramas we could rehearse just as we did in the theater, and it was a great time, wonderful time.
Do you remember the Max Liebman specials?
Oh, do I ever? Certainly. See, that came out of all this activity. And the first one was Lady in the Dark with Ann Sothern and Tyne Daly's father, who was James Daly, another wonderful actor, and Ann Sothern, wonderful actress. And that show was adapted for television by wonderful writers, Joe Stein, Neil Simon, and two other writers. And so while we were in rehearsal, we would break for lunch, and this went on for weeks and weeks, and I got a lunch with these writers, these absolutely very funny, wonderful writers, and I'd sit at the end of the table with Neil Simon. He was the youngest of the group, and they would be carrying on back and forth over lunch, and he would interject quietly to me his comments on their comments, and I'll never forget those lunches. And it was a wonderful show. It was a musical adaptation, and it was a pretty big deal. And
had you directed musicals before?
Not on that level. No, I'd worked in college on musicals with Alan Bergman, who subsequently became a pretty big writer.
Really,
lyricist.
UNC?
Yeah. We were in the same class together. So that was really a big step for me to do Lady in the Dark. I enjoyed that. And that led to The Chocolate Soldier, which was an adaptation of, I forgot the name of a very famous play. And that was Risa Stevens, Eddie Albert, another wonderful cast for Max Liebman. And I think that's what led me to the Philco Playhouse.
Now, those shows were in color.
Yes, they were the first color specials on television for NBC.
Did that present you with new challenges working in color?
Not really. As a matter of fact, the lighting was, in a funny way, almost easier than for black and white television.
Why?
Don't ask, but the cameras, the studio was hotter, that's for sure. But it didn't present, I did it just as you would do a regular television show.
Can you tell me a little bit about Max Liebman?
Wonderful guy. I didn't have too much to do with him once I was hired and the rehearsal was set in motion. So I didn't spend a lot of time with him, but lovely man, more outgoing, for instance, than Lee Strasberg, who had been a mentor. And of course, I thought his great talent was hiring these incredible writers. I mean, he just knew who they were and what they could do, and he let them loose, as it were. He was a terrific producer.
Okay, so Philco, how did you end up doing the Philco?
Got a call from Fred Coe, was I available? And Delbert Mann, who was doing the show with Arthur Penn and Vinnie Donahue. Delbert had done Marty and was invited to do the movie out in L.A., and so they needed somebody to replace Delbert. And Fred called me, was I available? Yes, would I come, do so many shows in the next season since Delbert was in California. And it was a great break for me, wonderful break.
Well, why was Philco Goodyear Playhouse important? Why is it significant?
Best writers. They had the best writers, Patty Chayefsky, Dick Nash and Richard Nash, Sumner Locke Elliott, David Shaw, J.P. Miller. Who could ask for anything more? I mean, Tad Moselle. You know, these all became ultimately major, major writers in television and films.
Now, did you work a lot with Fred Coe?
Not too much, because he too was involved in, at the time, I think he did Two for the Seesaw on Broadway, and he was, and I think he did The Miracle Worker as a film, so he was distracted from the Playhouse. And Gordon Duff, who was his associate and a producer, Gordon sort of filled in for Fred. So I worked mainly for Gordon, since Fred was not around too much at that period, in that season.
Gordon Duff, I don't think, is as well known as Fred Coe became. So can you tell us a little bit about him?
About Fred or Gordon?
About Gordon Duff. Yeah.
He was a wonderful producer, sweet man, bright man, also with a nice touch for the scripts, and very, very, very easy to work for, and very helpful, very, very constructive in any criticism. And it was, again, an exciting, wonderful time for me.
Can you mention a couple of the Philco dramas that stand out in your memory?
Well, I did a script of Stuart Stearns, wonderful, wonderful writer who became, again, a major film writer, major. And I did a script of Stewart's with Paul Newman and Inger Stevens and Herbert Berghoff. Very moving show. Took place on a farm, rural people in the South. And all I can remember was just wonderful rehearsing and a wonderful show to do. Among several, they were all good shows, but that stands out in particular. Paul was terrific. Then I did a show with Jimmy Dean, James Dean, that Sumner Locke Elliott worked on. Also an interesting show.
Well, tell me about working with James Dean.
Not easy. He was a friend from the studio, and it was not easy because in that show we cast Gusti Huber and Kurt Kasner, who were Viennese, Austrian actors. And they came to the first reading, in the first rehearsal. They knew all the lines. They had their props on the table. They were ready to go. Jimmy Dean, on the other hand, would read the script to himself mainly around the table and was not ready to deliver on any level of a performance until we got very close to airtime. And Kurt Kasner and Gusti Huber worked exactly the opposite way. They were ready from the first day of rehearsal with the performance. So I had to reconcile those three actors and bring them together in a period of about 7 days, 6 or 7 days before we got into the studio and on camera. That was not easy.
I mean, you said you'd been friends with Dean. Did that cause tension between you?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Because I also admired the work of Gusti Huber, who I'd seen on Broadway, and Kurt Kasner, who I'd seen on Broadway and in the movies. And I thought they were very wonderful, talented people. And even though they came from a different school than Jimmy and I had experienced at the studio, I had great respect for them and wanted them to have all the help we could give them. And so it did create tension. However, we survived. We made it through. And we remained friends after the show.
Do you remember what you did or said to reconcile the acting styles, to solve that problem?
Well, at one point, I finally had to just take Jimmy Dean aside and say, you gotta speak up, man. You know, these people got to know where they're going, and because all their scenes were together. And I just really, really read the riot act to him. And he responded. Thank goodness he did.
He came out with the proposal.
Yes, he knew the script, he knew the part, and he was just holding back until he got closer to the day of performance. And I said, Jimmy, you got to give these people a chance, you know. And he did, finally.
I mean, was that a method kind of technique that he was using?
I don't think so, no. No method I ever knew, no.
Okay. So generally, in terms of live television, what did you like most about it?
The fact that it was very similar to the theater. You rehearsed with your actors for days, day in and day out. You had your writer generally with you, the guy who wrote the script, or I was going to say, or the woman, but there were not many women writers at that time. And so it was just as if I were working in the theater. We had time to develop and create characters and develop the story. And then getting into the studio on camera was the icing on the cake. I had prepared and had laid out all my shots. And so basically it was that medium was so exciting because of the rehearsal time. The effort in the theater is always so exciting because you have time to really create characters and work on the story, as opposed to television. When we moved out to California and we had to shoot television shows on film, it was, you got a script, you got on the stage, and you boom, 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 you're shooting before you're even knowing who the actors are really. You've just met the actors and you go right into the set and you got to shoot the scenes. Not easy for somebody who comes from the theater.
What was the toughest part about live television?
Well, getting all your shots and, not messing up your cables and getting your cameras where they had to be and bringing the show in with that stopwatch on time. I mean, it was not easy, but it was exciting.
I mean, do you remember shows that ran really long or really short?
Oh, no, you couldn't. I mean, if you went over, boom, they would cut you off. But you had your associate director with the watch, and, you had rehearsed, and you knew as you were going on air during the show where you were. There's so many seconds behind, so many seconds ahead, and there were places where you could stretch. You always had the crawl at the end of the show with the credits, which could either go faster or slower, and that was a saving grace.
Did you feel stressful? Was it stressful when you were in the booth?
Yes, it was, but good stress, exciting stress, if you were prepared, and we were. It was stressful, but listen, we were all young, we were all excited, and it worked.
One thing people always remember or talk about on live television is when something went wrong on the air. Did anything like that happen in your shows?
I never had any major catastrophes, no. I mean, I would occasionally lose a camera and have to shuffle around and so forth. But basically, I had a kind of charmed life for myself in the live television days. My wife had experiences as an actress in live television where things would happen on her shows, but I was very lucky.
You got lucky. So after Philco, you made some changes. You had a transition. What happened?
Well, I had done some work in California on television. I came out here, for instance, I did a show with Milton Berle and Ann Southern that was written by Gore Vidal. It was a drama, a nice comedy. And I'd come out here to do the big payoff to open CBS Television City here in Hollywood. So I'd been back and forth doing some television, live television here in LA. And then after I had done one of the Philco shows, I was out here doing something else, I don't remember now what, and I had a call, would I please meet with Dory Sherry at MGM, and was taken to MGM and to his magnificent office. And I sat down, and Dory Sherry, who was the head of MGM Studios in their days of glory still, said, well, Jeff, I want to ask you a couple of questions about that show that was on the air last Sunday. And here was this head of MGM dissecting a scene from a show I had done and asking me, well, why did that character decide to do this? And how come we went from that scene to that? And I couldn't believe that, he had been so tuned in that he knew all the particulars of that show. And he said, yeah, I watch the Philco Playhouse all the time. Wonderful actors, good directors. how would you like to work at MGM and make movies? And I said, yeah, well, that sounds pretty good to me. And he said to his assistant, I have to tell you this story. He said to his assistant, Walter, take Jeff down to the commissary, have some lunch, and then bring him back up to the office after lunch. So I was escorted to the MGM commissary with all the major MGM stars sitting in that commissary. I was brought to a table with Norman Corwin, Andre Previn, and Bronislaw Kaper, the composer. And there were three of them sitting at a table with an empty chair. And Walter said, gentlemen, this is Jeff Hayden. He's here meeting with Dory. Would you mind if he sat and had lunch with you? And he sat me down with these three people, all of whom I had known by reputation. And I had the most wonderful lunch with them. Got out of that chair after lunch, called my agent and said, make the deal. I'd like to work here. And then so I started at MGM.
So that must have seemed like paradise.
It was. It was. Norman Corwin had been the great writer on radio and producer, director, whom we had listened to in Chapel Hill when I was at school every Saturday night, sitting around the big radio in the Student Union building. Andre Previn, of course, was the great composer, pianist, and Bronnie Caper had just written High Lily, High Low, and I just couldn't believe I was sitting in the august company of these wonderful, funny guys. And so I spent 2 years at MGM, made one movie.
And how did that experience turn out?
Not so good, because I'd been working in television for 10 years, or close to 10 years. And to take 2 years to make one movie was something I just couldn't deal with. It was just much too slow a pace for me. Although I enjoyed making the movie in the south of France, as it happens, but I said, no, I've got to go back to television.
And can you just tell us a little bit about the film?
It was a lovely story with Anna Marie Pierangeli, Mel Ferrer, Theo Becquel, and the south of France, and was a very nice story.
What was the name of it?
The Vintage.
So after you made that film and your contract was up, what happened with MGM?
I just said, if you don't mind, I'd like to get back to television, and just started freelancing in television out here.
Did MGM make you an offer to continue your
Yes.
contract?
They, as a matter of fact, said, well, since you want to do television, we don't have a television department at MGM. Why don't you just move over and head up a television department and create series out of our movies? And for some reason, after 2 years on the lot, I said, thank you. I just as soon not be tied down to one studio. And so they said, fine. And my contract, the second year, was up. And so I just went back and started doing television shows. I did, I think the first one was Lassie, and then the Loretta Young show was very big at the time.
Was there a specific show that MGM had talked to you about turning into a specific movie, but developing into a TV show?
No, but I think Kildare, Dr. Kildare, was the first that they did. So that was from a movie, and Chamberlain was hired to do it. But I was happier just going back to my life as a freelance director.
Before we get into the freelance years, I want to ask if you remember, or how aware you were of the blacklist during the 50s.
I was very aware of it, yes, because of actors that I knew in New York who couldn't get work. And I had, several whom I knew from the theater. And one of them in particular was Will Geer, who finally broke through and played the father in the Waltons. And I kind of helped get him going back by doing a play with him, which helped move him along. Yes, I was aware of it, painfully aware of it.
Did you run into it on any of the shows that you directed?
Not really, no.
Okay, so you're in Los Angeles. You're beginning to direct freelance television. You mentioned Lassie. Tell me about that show.
It was fun. I read the script, and there was a duck. Was it a goose in the script, written in the script? And I had just seen Friendly Persuasion, the movie that Willie Wyler had made, and I loved that movie. And I said to the production manager, we'll get the goose that Willie Wyler used on his movie. Oh, he said, fine. And I came to the set a few days later or the next day, and here were these crates with 4 different geese. I said, no, I just wanted the goose that Willie used. And they said, well, yeah, this goose walks forward. This goose walks backwards. That goose flaps the wings. And that goose will quack on cue. And so I had 4 geese. That was my introduction to making a television show in Hollywood.
So Willie Wyler's goose was actually 4 different
geese. And then the dog in Lassie, I thought was a dog, right? Oh no, there were 3 dogs on the set. One that did this, one that jumped over fences, one that, would lie down on command, one that would bark on command. And it was a wonderful learning experience for me.
So how did you direct the dog or dogs Lassie?
It was wonderful. You say to the trainer, Rudd Weatherwax, I think was his name. I would say to Rudd, well, listen, we need him to, sit here in the kitchen and bark in a certain cue. And he would sit the dog down, and when the cue came, he'd be behind the camera, and he'd go, whatever we needed, and the dog would simply do whatever the trainer wanted him to do. That was easy. I mean, that always worked.
And the actors on Lassie, how were they in terms of playing against opposite a dog?
Oh, lovely. I mean, they were lovely actors, all of them. And they were, that was their series. That was their life. I loved the animals. The animals were always not only well behaved, but so well trained. It was great.
The Loretta Young show, you won an award for that. Tell me, what was
did. I wish I could remember the name of the episode. Anyway, she was wonderful also to work with. And I was given a very good script, one of the scripts that I did there. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember the author of that show, but his name doesn't come to my mind. Anyway, several months later, I was told I won an award for that show, the Robert E. Sherwood Award, as I remember. So like a humanitarian award.
Was that the 20-cent tip was that the episode you won the award for?
I remember that title. I'm not sure that was that show. Maybe it was. I'm sorry.
Did Loretta Young star in the one that you...
Oh, yes. Oh, she starred in all of them. Oh, for sure.
But playing a different character.
Yes, right.
What was she like to work with?
Wonderful. Wonderful. Talented, responsive, disciplined, well-prepared, knew really what she wanted to do and how to do it, but took direction beautifully. She was just fun to work with.
So around that time, you started directing for the Donna Reed show.
Right. And that was a wonderful experience. I did that show for 3 seasons. And Donna, also, very wonderful person, talented actress, bright lady, had her hand not only in her performance every week on the show, but very critical of the stories and the scripts, and in a very pleasant, constructive way, always kind of made them a little better. She was just terrific to work with, as was that whole group on the Donna Reed show, which is why I stayed there as long as I did.
So did Donna Reed seem to be running the show, would you say?
No, there was a wonderful writer-producer, Paul West was his name, and he was just a very special talent, very wonderful touch with family shows. For example, I would come in on Monday morning, and Paul would say, come on in, we'll have a cup of coffee, and let's discuss the weekend. He had 2 children, the same age, basically, as our 2 children. So every Monday morning, I would meet with Paul in his office, drink coffee, and talk about our weekend activity. Him, his kids, what we did with our kids. And 3 weeks later, I would be given a script based upon those discussions, but always with just a little touch, just a little spin to make it funny, to make it amusing, to make it over the line, as it were, from the real life experience. So I just so enjoyed doing that show. He didn't write all the scripts, but he had wonderful writers around him who did those shows. Sumner Long was one of them, who then went to Broadway with a big success, and many other terrific comedy writers who wrote for the Donna Reed show. So Donna was always integral in the developing nature of the rehearsals. But no, it was Paul's show.
Was Donna as wholesome as her image?
Totally. She was.
Now, so you said that some of the scripts came out of those conversations you had with Paul West. That means that the Donna Reed show is a little bit autobiographical for you, right?
Yes, to a point, yes.
Do you remember any specific anecdotes from your life that turned into a Donna Reed show?
I think one comes to mind. We had trouble with the washing machine, or we had trouble getting somebody out to fix the washing machine. And a few weeks later, along comes a script with Donna and the washing machine that was absolutely hilarious. It was just a crazy, wonderful, funny show. And it all started from the fact that I mentioned that for some reason we had trouble getting the guy out to repair the washing machine. I came in one day and I said, Paul, I noticed a couple of gray hairs on my head. Oh, he said, I went through that years ago. And a few weeks later, there was this whole show with Carl Betts looking in the mirror, discovering a gray hair. And out of that, he just developed this whole episode, which again was hilarious. And that's what we would do.
That's great. So that means that in some of those shows, Donna Reed is doing things that had actually happened to Eva Marie Saint.
Yes. Well, or listen, mainly we were doing things that happened to Donna, or could happen to Donna. But from time to time, we had these other, or much of it came from Paul's own family, his 2 kids.
And did your wife and kids, how did they feel about being captured on the
They didn't know. I would tell Eva Marie, remember the gray hair incident? But actually what was fun, my mother-in-law could always tell which were my shows on Donna Reed, because we alternated. Robert Ellis Miller, wonderful director, he would alternate with me because we had to prepare for our shooting week, And but my mother-in-law always knew which were my shows, which was kind of fun for me.
Okay, we're going to stop to change the tape.